The Subcommittee on Livestock and Foreign Agriculture will now come to order. This hearing of the Subcommittee of Livestock and Foreign Agriculture entitled Reviewing the State of the Dairy Economy. All of us who represent various portions of American agriculture understand the importance of the dairy industry. Today and historically, and we know the challenges that the industry has been facing. Last year, in a bipartisan effort, we decided to really take a closer look at the dairy title, and we made changes. We made changes because we thought it was a reflection of the need that was resulting in the hard-hit changes that have been taking place with the dairy industry across the country. So part of this morning's hearing is to really get our witnesses' take on what direction we need to be doing, what efforts that the committee needs to be following with regards to implementing the changes in the dairy title. So let us begin with the opening statements, and we look forward to hearing the witnesses' testimony. As we understand, as I stated, the dairy industry in America is facing a crisis. This hearing is just one part of the subcommittee's efforts to continually respond to those challenges. There will be subsequent hearings and workshops around the country as we work with the United States Department of Agriculture to implement the new title. Addressing these critical problems, I believe, is one of the highest priorities of this subcommittee. In speaking with our chairman, Colin Peterson, I know how much he feels that this is critical. We all represent important parts of America's dairy country. The United States, though, the reality is we've lost over almost 20,000 licensed dairies in the last 10 years. 20,000 licensed dairies. Nearly every day it seems another national news story about the family farmers making tough choices having to sell their dairy. They don't do it by choice. My family's been involved in the dairy industry for 3 generations. I know how families feel. The dairy is a part of their sum and substance. And in California, we have the nation's top dairy producing states, dairies that have been passed down from generation to generation, including the one I grew up on. So this issue I have a lot of personal reflections on. But let's be clear about the facts. The dairy industry provides nearly 1 million jobs in the United States, an economic impact of over $200 billion. In my district alone, dairy contributes over $2 billion to the local economy. When we lose a dairy farm, we lose those jobs, we lose the investments that the farm provides. As I said, we worked hard in the last farm bill to make changes in the dairy safety net. Yesterday, I met with the United States Department of Agriculture Undersecretary Bill Northey, who told me that they are making progress in getting the new dairy margin coverage program implemented. This morning, as some of you may know, the United States Department of Agriculture will announce an online decision tool that will let farmers estimate how the dairy margin coverage could work for them. And that's welcome news because we're pushing them to get this process out there. As soon as later this week, we hope the USDA will send out letters to dairy farmers that participated in the margin protection program and let them know what premium refund or credit they will be able to receive. These updates are good news, but unfortunately the expected start of the dairy margin sign-up is still June 17th. I appreciate the priority that Secretary Perdue and the USDA has put on implementing the dairy program, but I know time is of the essence. For many of these dairy men and women, they are looking as to how long they can survive. And therefore, when they've had to endure years of low margins, when they're input costs exceed their receipts on a monthly basis, how much longer can they hold on? And of course, the loss of the dairies over the last 10 years are a reflection of that loss of equity, that loss of dairies. When we look at the dairy industry across the country and the regional challenges that we face, I've learned clearly in the 15 years I've been in Congress that one program doesn't fit all farms equally. And so when we made the changes last year, we tried to take that into account. That's why I strongly supported the more risk management agency insurance products for dairy farms, and made sure that farms could participate in both the dairy margin coverage and livestock gross margin insurance for dairies. Both Chairman Peterson and our previous chairman, who is here, worked very closely in trying to make sure that we kept all the options in the menu. In addition to a thorough Farm Bill implementation oversight, the subcommittee will also focus on other issues impacting our dairy farmers. And what are they? Well, they're trade and labor. U.S. dairy is fighting hard in global markets to face these challenges. We are hoping that progress is being made on the reauthorization of the USMCA or NAFTA 2, whatever you want to call it. But Mexico is a top destination for the United States dairy industry, and it needs to be maintained and, I believe, expanded. And while the U.S.-Mexico agreement allows Canada to keep the bulk of their current domestic system under a supply management scheme, which we actually looked at here some 5 years ago, recent International Trade Commission economic analysis indicated that the proposal forecasts, if we implement the new United States-Mexican-Canada trade agreement, that would provide an additional $300 million, they estimate, additional dairy exports under the agreement. Frankly, I hope we can do better. That's positive, but I think more can be done. So the last area that is of critical need to our dairy men and women around the country is a reliable workforce. Trying to come up with an immigration solution for agriculture is long overdue. Some of us have been laboring on this for many, many years under multiple administrations. I've been calling for comprehensive immigration reform. I don't think that's going to happen in this Congress, but maybe we can get something done incrementally to provide a more stable workforce for the dairy men and women and agriculture industry in general. We in Congress need to find ways to address these challenges with both current and future workforce needs, including access to a year-round visa program, and whether or not modification in the H-2A actually is a way to do that remains to be seen, but there are things that need to be done, clearly. I know from my personal experience in generations in California, working on a dairy was always considered a high-skilled, valuable, good-paying job, considered a blue-collar job, basically, among agricultural workforce because it's year-round, and there are a number of benefits that come to working in a dairy. So I hope a legislative fix that we are working on will come to fruition. I take to heart Secretary Sonny Perdue's call for legislative reform, and I hope that he will continue to be engaged in this effort as we work on a plan. So with that said, we have our ranking member here, and I would defer to him for an opening statement. And we look forward to doing right by our dairy farmers, our men and women who work every day, because cows are milked 365 days a year, to put that food on America's dinner table every night. So I look forward to the conversation that we have, and Ranking Member Rouser, I will defer to you for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Costa, and the cows don't take a day off, do they?
No, they don't.
And neither should we. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I really appreciate the chairman for holding this hearing to focus on the state of the dairy industry. All sectors of the agriculture economy, this is no secret, are facing challenging times, and of course the conditions for our dairy farmers are no exception. Dairymen across the country have faced a multi-year period of low milk prices and trade uncertainty, along with labor challenges that have remained unsolved, quite frankly, for decades. These problems are plaguing dairy producers of all sizes and in all regions of the country, which is why House Republicans prioritize making key improvements to the safety net and enhancing risk management options for both large and small dairy operations during the past several Congresses leading up to passage of the new Farm Bill. I want to commend Ranking Member Conaway, who is here with us this morning as well, for his work to remove the limitation on livestock insurance policies in the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018. Many of you will remember that battle well. He also did an incredible job shepherding the 2018 Farm Bill through the House and, of course, eventually to the President for his signature so it would become law. The focused effort he led to increase coverage options, reducing premiums significantly for catastrophic coverage in Tier 2, and eliminating the restriction between livestock gross margin insurance and the new dairy margin coverage program are all improvements intended to help producers better manage the risk and uncertainty that they face. Dairy farmers and their lenders are watching closely for news from USDA about the availability of coverage under the new program. And I want to thank Secretary Perdue and FPAC Undersecretary Northey for making the implementation of DMC a priority. And in fact, as the chairman noted, as of this morning, USDA announced the web-based decision aid tool for DMC is now available for producers to begin reviewing their options before sign-up begins. I think we all can be pleased with that. While the improvements to the safety net are critical to helping producers survive the tough economic times, what our farmers really need is improved market conditions. This is why swift approval of USMCA is so critical for our farmers and ranchers. According to the long-awaited analysis by the International Trade Commission, as mentioned by the chairman in his remarks as well, dairy is one of the sectors with the most to gain from the renegotiated agreement with Canada and Mexico. While implementation will need to be closely monitored, the additional access for U.S. dairy products and the elimination of Canadian Class 6 and Class 7 dairy pricing strategies are a major, major win for American dairy producers and processors. As we would say back home, a big-time win. I touched on this at the outset, but I want to highlight again the shortage of adequate labor because of our broken immigration system. Dairy producers essentially have no reliable supply of workers. As we all know, the current agriculture guest worker program is designed for seasonal labor needs, not the year-round work required on dairies. This past Congress, I was proud to be an original co-sponsor of H.R. 4092, the Ag Act, which attempted to address the needs of farmers, ranchers, and other agriculture businesses struggling to find labor. While immigration can be a very complicated and highly emotional issue, we should all be able to recognize the disservice congressional dysfunction has done for all sectors of the agriculture industry in failing to pass meaningful reform of the guest worker program. This has been a debate that's been ongoing for at least 2 decades, if not more. And going back to my years with Senator Helms, I remember working on this in the mid-'90s and the late '90s, and then we thought we had something in the mid-2000s. And it's been on and on and on. The fact of the matter is we got to get the job on this done. You know, as we speak, cows go unmilked, fruit gets left on trees, and crops rot in the field because farmers cannot find a reliable, legal source of labor. Meanwhile, we in Washington always wait for the results of the next election, and the problems continue to grow. We cannot continue to ignore this problem, and I urge all of us in Congress to put aside all the politics related to it, and for once on this issue, start beginning to craft a common sense solution that the President can sign. American agriculture needs it desperately, and I think we all can agree on that. Again, I want to thank all the witnesses for appearing here today to share your perspectives on the state of the dairy industry, and I look forward to hearing from each of you. I yield back.
I thank the ranking member, and we're pleased this morning to have both the chair of the House Agriculture Committee and the ranking member, and in tradition, we will be pleased to hear them with any opening comments they care to make. Chairman Peterson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and the ranking member for holding this hearing. It's been a tough number of years in the dairy industry. I think we've made significant improvements in the Farm Bill, and if I hope people hang in there long enough to figure out what they are. One of my frustrations has been the length of time that it's taken for them to roll this out, but that wasn't really caused by us. That was caused by the Senate and some of the provisions that they put into the bill. that have drug out this situation, especially the refund thing. But they're, apparently going to get it done in June, and it'll be retroactive. So I just hope people will hang in there until they get time to figure it out. The other thing I'm a little bit concerned about is that there might be confusion sowed by what the department is talking about putting out there. I haven't seen it, but I'm hearing they're putting out this decision chart that's going to have people look through and figure out whether they should have $5 or $9 or whatever this stuff is. And, as if there's any question. And in my opinion, there is no question about what to do. It is very simple. Unless you are wealthy and have deep pockets, and if you want to stay in the dairy business, you should take $9.50. You should take it for 5 years and lock it in, And if you don't come and complain to me, and hopefully we won't have to use it. Hopefully the market will be there and we will not have to dip into this. But, for a relatively small amount of money, you can lock in a gross income for 5 years. And, it's probably not as much as people would like, but it's enough to get you through some of these tough times. So, we've made improvement for the smaller producers, but we've also, in what we did, I think, took care of all aspects of the industry. We have a new revenue insurance program that's going to be available for everybody. We went from 4 to 5 million pounds. We improved the livestock gross margin program. So there's something in this dairy provision for everybody. And, I look forward to working with the industry and the members as we roll this out. So far, we have not seen the industry splinter into regional disputes, although there is some noise out there, different parts of the country. Hopefully that will dissipate and not grow into any kind of effort. As we've worked hard and long, Jim Costa and I and others, to make sure that we have an industry that can work together and not get back into the old fights between the Northeast and the Midwest and California and so forth. And we've been able to do that. So we got enough other problems without us fighting amongst ourselves. So I think we have a program that is pretty good, and I think it'll be laid out here today. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing, and we'll look forward to the testimony.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the good work that you've done. I think your observations I share, and clearly I think you've given good advice in terms of how we implement this effort in a bipartisan way that I think reflects the needs of our dairy industry. And certainly it's part of, I think, the responsibility of the House Ag Committee to try to keep the dairy industry working together, because it does no good when we get divided in between different regions of the country. The ranking member, former Chairman Conway, we're pleased that you're here, and we'd love to hear any comments you might have to say.
No comments, Mr. Chairman, other than to say that the subcommittee is in good hands with you as chairman and David Rouser as ranking member. And David, I appreciate your compliments and your opening remarks. And let's hear from the witnesses. I think enough yapping gone from this side of the stage, so I yield back.
All right. Well, we thank the ranking member and always for the good work that you do and have over the years working in a bipartisan effort. The chair will request that members submit their opening statements for the record so the witnesses may begin their testimony, and so we'll have ample time to get to the questions. And we'd like to recognize our first witness. And by the way, we've recognized people as they've come in here based upon seniority, so I have a list, and that's what I'll do. I'll follow the list, alternating between Democrats and Republicans. And we'd like to begin with Chairman Peterson making an introduction of a constituent who will be our first witness. Chairman Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we're pleased to have Sadie Frerichs here from Melrose, Minnesota. They own and operate a 90-cow first-generation farm in that area. Anybody that's been to Melrose knows that the dairy industry is ground zero there. Without them, Melrose would dry up. So, Sadie, we are very pleased that you were willing to come out and testify here today. I see you've, that your son, Dan, is with you here. Oh, there he is back there. So we got an up-and-coming dairy farmer there, huh? Do you work him hard? That's good. Yeah. He's shaking his head. So anyway, the Frerichs name is very well-known name in that part of the world, and we're pleased that you're, choosing to get into the dairy business, and we wish you all the success, and happy to have you here at the committee, so thank you.
Thank you. Would you please begin, Ms. Frerichs? Pleased to have you here this morning and your family.
Good morning, Chairman Costa, Congressman Rouser, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Sadie Frerichs. I am a dairy farmer from Minnesota. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today about the state of the dairy economy. I'd like to start by telling you a little bit more about my farm. I own, manage, and operate a first-generation dairy farm together with my husband, Glenn, and our 3 children, Dan, Monica, and Daphne. As Congressman Peterson said, my son Dan is here with me today. We milk 90 cows and manage 200 acres of pasture and cropland. 14 years ago, we left secure jobs with full benefits to answer the call to farm. We enjoyed the life we had created in the suburbs, but something was missing in our lives. We spent all of our weekends at either my family's farm or Glenn's family farm. It turns out the cows were calling us back. We started our dairy career on my father's farm, but it quickly became clear that we didn't have a future there. The dairy industry was dying in that part of Minnesota, and as farm numbers dwindled, so too did the businesses that dairy farms rely upon: milk processors, feed mills, equipment sales and repair, etc. So we moved our dairy cows to the part of Minnesota where Glenn grew up, Melrose. We bought 20 acres with a house and a barn. We rented 200 acres of cropland, on which we were able to grow the corn silage and hay we needed to feed our cows. A lot has changed since we bought our farm. We've doubled the number of cows we milk. We've more than doubled the size of our family. We discovered that we love more about dairy farming than just the cows. We love spending every day together and raising our kids on a farm. We love doing meaningful work and giving tours of our farm so that others can learn more about dairy farming. We love utilizing our creativity and problem-solving skills to overcome challenges. And believe me, there have been some challenges. First came 2009 and milk prices lower than anyone thought possible. We got through that year with the help of our farm business management instructor and our farm service agency lender. Then we ended up losing most of our cropland when a neighbor offered our landlord a rental rate we couldn't afford. We switched to buying most of our hay and corn silage and relied more on grazing our cows. Now we are facing our biggest challenge yet. We got into dairy farming knowing that prices cycle, both for milk and for feed. Accordingly, we planned for those cycles. We saved money during the good years and spent carefully during the lean years. Unfortunately, prices haven't cycled for the past several years. They're stuck at a level just below our cost of production. Our challenge currently is that all of the money we saved during the good years is gone. For the first time in our farming career, we asked our bank for a line of credit so that we could keep paying our vendors. I cannot fully explain the level of mental and emotional stress that comes along with watching your savings evaporate and your short-term debt accumulate. I can tell you that our farm business would not survive another year like 2018. We talked countless times about how to adjust our business plan so that we could keep doing what we love. Each time, that discussion ended with reducing the size of our herd and one of us getting a job in town. We aren't having those discussions anymore. First, we set a price floor through the new Dairy Revenue Protection Insurance that was approved by USDA last year. Second, by our calculations, the Federal Dairy Margin Coverage Program will help us mitigate risk and secure a profit going forward. We will continue working together with our children to care for our cows and our land. While we'd rather not have to rely on government programs, I hope DMC and other risk management tools will allow other family farms to continue doing what they love as well. Rural America needs successful farms, both for our engagement in our community and for our economic contributions. In a typical year, our farm spends $500,000, most of that locally. Almost every dollar invested in DMC will ultimately be invested in rural America. I'd like to finish by thanking Chairman Peterson for his longstanding support of dairy farmers and all of the committee members for these much-needed improvements to the Farm Bill. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Sadie, thank you for that heartfelt and well-stated testimony, and you're very correct. Congressman Peterson does an excellent job not only in representing his district, but America's dairy industry. I'm going to allow, as we progress with the witnesses here, members an opportunity to introduce some of the witnesses that they've asked to testify here today because, and we're going to maintain the regular order, but as I think many of you know here, we have multiple committee hearings that are taking place on a usual legislative day, and therefore members come and go, and I want to make sure that they get a chance to introduce their witnesses that are here, even though they may have to leave during some of the testimony. So I will come back to you, Andre, in a moment, but I want to ask Mr. Brindisi, one of our new stars from New York, to introduce a witness from his area, and then we'll go through the order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to introduce Mike Mcmahan, who owns and operates Easy Acre Farms in Homer, New York, and his wife Edie is joining him as well today. Their operation has set the standard on animal care and environmental stewardship. He has also been a strong advocate for common sense labor solutions so that dairy farmers can continue providing a safe and abundant food supply for our country. Upstate New York dairy farmers like Mike Mcmahan are why I asked to serve on the Agriculture Committee, and I'm happy that he is joining us here today and look forward to his testimony. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Congressman Brindisi, and we're looking forward to hearing your testimony at the appropriate order. I'd also now like to recognize Congresswoman Hartzler for her good work that she does on this committee, and she has a witness that she would like to introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very proud to introduce my friend from the University of Missouri in Columbia, Dr. Scott Brown. So glad that he is here again. He has testified many times before Congress and is viewed, I believe, as one of the premier experts in our nation on dairy policy. And so proud of him. He's the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, as well as a professor. And he's received many awards that I could cite, but most importantly, he's helped raise up my two ag staffers that I've had during my time here, including Carly Esser, who's here in the audience today. And I want to thank you for that. You're a wonderful teacher and a wonderful example for them, and certainly a wonderful resource for us here in Congress. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We thank the Congresswoman, and we're looking forward, Dr. Brown, to hearing your testimony at the appropriate time. And our last witness is a person that Congressman Thompson, who I enjoy working with always, would like to introduce from Pennsylvania.
Chairman, thank you so much. Really is a privilege and honor to introduce this gentleman, a friend and a leader on dairy in the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dave Smith. He's a fourth-generation dairy farmer from Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. He's a graduate of Virginia Tech, where he completed a BS in dairy science. And upon graduation, Dave returned home to the farm and co-manages the family farm with his son, where they also grow crops and raise cows. Dave also served as executive director of the Pennsylvania Dairymen's Association, an organization he's been involved with for more than 20 years. He's also very active with the annual Pennsylvania Farm Show, which actually a number of members in this committee have attended with me the first weekend in January. Mark your calendars. Largest indoor agriculture exposition in the country. Not too far from here either, about 2.5 hours from here. So to Dave and all of our witnesses, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Congressman Thompson, for that kind introduction. I will now introduce our second witness, a friend who I've known for many years, Andrei Michalski, who serves as the president and CEO of California Dairies, Inc., which is based in Visalia, California. It is owned by 360-plus dairy men and women who ship their milk to California Dairy, Inc. They sell nearly 7% of the total milk in the United States, second largest co-op. Andre is a seasoned expert in the dairy industry, which is why we've asked him to testify today. He also serves on the Trade Committee Chair for the International Dairy Foods Association and serves on the Dairy Advisory Board for California Department of Food and Agriculture. So, Mr. Mcmahan, we're welcome to have you here, and we'd like you to begin your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Costa, Ranking Member Rouser, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide my perspective on the current state of the U.S. dairy economy with a focus on trade today. My name is Andre Michalewski, and I'm President and CEO of California Dairies, Inc., known as CDI. CDI is the largest dairy farmer-owned cooperative in California and the second largest in the United States. The cooperative was formed to sell, market, and add value to our members' milk. Our family-owned dairy farms represent 7% of all the milk produced in the United States. Mr. Chairman, as you have noted and are fully aware, our home state of California remains the leading dairy state, producing 18% of the country's milk. Our cooperative is the largest producer of retail butter in the United States and the largest producer and exporter of milk powder. Today, I'll focus my testimony in three areas. First, offer examples of industry current issues. Second, I'll describe our trade views, and finally, I'll outline some suggestions to improve dairy's overall business health. U.S. dairy is a dynamic industry made up of 39,000 dairy farms and slightly more than 1,300 processing plants that, with associated businesses, support 3 million U.S. jobs. 16% of all U.S. milk production is exported. Thousands of jobs are dependent on these U.S. dairy exports. Today's dairy farmers face challenges on multiple fronts, but also great opportunities. The U.S. dairy industry has amazing potential and is ready to meet the growing domestic and international demand for milk. Yet the U.S. dairy industry has been stressed, as noted, for several years due to low margins and low worldwide prices. This has led numerous dairy families to sell their businesses. These on-farm losses, combined with reduced market values for dairy cows, are stressing bank relationships. The end result is that more of our milk is produced by fewer, larger, more productive operations. Another challenge is that every dairy farm in the United States has labor availability issues. An agricultural guest worker program that meets year-round dairy needs for the industry is critical. The U.S. domestic price is highly influenced by global prices and the global supply-demand balance of milk. The U.S. is no longer isolated from world prices. U.S. milk price recovery was halted in 2018 due to EU intervention stocks and the retaliatory tariffs with Mexico and China. Our biggest competitors producing milk and dairy products for the export markets are the European Union and New Zealand. The most valuable export markets for our industry are Mexico, Canada, Japan, China, South America, and Southeast Asia, then followed by the Middle East and Africa. Free trade agreements that open markets and lower trade barriers are crucial to the dairy industry's long-term economic health. The U.S. has not completed and passed a new trade deal in well over a decade. We need more comprehensive free trade agreements. The EU has trade agreements completed or in process with 9 of the top 10 dairy importing countries, while the U.S. simply has 4. Likewise, New Zealand has trade agreements with most Asian countries where demand is growing at a rapid pace. For the dairy industry, any trade agreement must simply meet 2 criteria. First, and most importantly, a fair and level playing field is critical. Second, any trade agreement should include robust access for the whole bucket of milk, all dairy products across the board. Too often, trade agreements isolate dairy market access to a limited subset of dairy products. Now, just a quick comment on current negotiations. Mexico is the top market for all U.S. dairy exports, valued at $1.4 billion in 2018. Canada is second. The USMCA deal, as negotiated, meets the dairy industry's top priorities, and that is why we urge swift congressional approval of this agreement. China has been the 3rd largest exporting customer for the U.S. dairy. Opportunities in China are significant, but the U.S. has not been on a level playing field with our competitors. Due to recently imposed retaliatory tariffs, we're now seeing a precipitous decline in U.S. dairy exports to China. Japan is the 5th largest country for U.S. dairy exports, and currently we face high barriers to trade in Japan. Dairy market access in any trade agreement must match or exceed that achieved under TPP and the new EU-Japan trade agreement. In 2018, the EU exported nearly $1.7 billion in product to the United States, but U.S. companies exported just $145 million back to them. High tariffs and other non-tariff barriers such as burdensome import licensing and certification requirements stand in the way. We cannot afford to set a precedent of negotiating with any trading partner that sidelines agriculture. All free trade agreements must include access for agriculture. In my written testimony, I provided several short-term industry solutions, and I'll just highlight one. A policy proposal that has great potential for improving sales for the state of the U.S. dairy economy is establishing a national enhanced standard for fluid milk products. In summary, the dairy industry is a significant part of the U.S. economy. Price volatility has had a significant impact on dairy farms. Trade policy is a vital part of our future success. Our industry needs increased access to a greater number of markets and a level playing field. The U.S. dairy industry envisions a bright future, capitalizing on opportunities in the global marketplace. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, and we appreciate your comments and look forward to the question period where we'll get a chance to dig a little deeper. Our next witness has been introduced by my colleague here. He's the owner and operator of Easy Acres in Homer, New York, wonderful part of the country. Very much. And Mr. Mcmahan owns and operates his operation there on standard on animal care and environmental stewardship, and we're happy in the subcommittee to have you here this morning and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Costa. Chairman Costa, Ranking Member Rouser, and honorable members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to give testimony concerning the current state of the dairy industry. I'd like to address two major challenges to dairy in this country: labor, specifically immigrant labor, and environmental sustainability. Labor is always an issue in dairy. In 1995, our farm moved out of 4 old barns into a new state-of-the-art facility. One of our goals was to stop the endless turnover of labor that we'd been experiencing in our previous situation. With comfortable working conditions, reasonable hours, and being able to pay a higher wage due to modern efficiencies, we felt this would be an easy accomplishment. However, after 5 years, that wasn't happening. My wife, Edie, behind me, who's responsible for our payroll, calculated that she had issued an average of 39 W-2s per year over those 5 years to maintain a crew of 10 full-time workers. In January 2000, we replaced half our crew with Hispanic workers and instantly saw a change. Over the next 5 years, the average number of W-2s issued was 18, which includes part-time people for the cropping program. It was a remarkable benefit given the cost and time and money to constantly train new people. Not only did turnover nearly stop, but we found in the migrant workers a work ethic, animal handling skills, and a level of respect for coworkers and owners alike that seemed to be lost in the local workforce. While it is not this committee's jurisdiction, immigrant labor is absolutely critical to my operation. Regardless of the unemployment rate in our county, local labor doesn't want to milk cows. A 2017 Texas A&M study found that 79% of the U.S. milk supply is harvested by Hispanic workers. Agriculture needs a way to secure an immigrant workforce that is steady, willing, able, and legal. I realize that immigration is a difficult topic, but agriculture's need for immigrant labor is undeniable. America needs a safe, affordable, and abundant food supply produced within its borders. Food security is part of Homeland Security. I'd also like to touch on environmental sustainability. New York and the Northeast are blessed with luxuriant water. This and a temperate climate make us well-suited as a current and future dairy region. It differentiates us from other milk-producing areas such as the Southwest. This abundant water also presents dairy with challenges. For us, environmental sustainability equates with water quality protection. My farm is situated in an environmentally sensitive area with 70% of my land in the Chesapeake Bay watershed and 30% in the Skaneateles Lake watershed, which provides unfiltered drinking water to 230,000 people in the city of Syracuse. It also lies over a sole source aquifer, which supplies water to 24,000 people in our town. Our opportunities to pollute are many, and we take our responsibility to protect water seriously. Since 1997, we have been a case study farm for Cornell University, pioneering an approach to water protection referred to as nutrient mass balance. In a nutshell, it is a whole farm systems approach to balancing the pounds of nutrients and inputs which are imported onto the farm annually with the nutrients that leave the farm in the form of milk, meat, and manure. Nitrogen and phosphorus are the main nutrients of concern, and we want to prevent excessive accumulations of these nutrients on the farmstead, since they may be lost to the environment and present a risk to surface and groundwater. The goal is to reduce the amount of nutrients brought onto the farm by tailoring feed and fertilizers to meet the exact needs of animals and crops. Reuse the nutrients by proper storage of manure and timing of application to growing crops, and recycle them into abundant homegrown forage and grains to feed our cows. Since 2003, we've been able to reduce the amount of excess nitrogen remaining on our farm by 1/3, and phosphorus remaining on our farm by 135%. These are significant reductions. Herd health, milk production have improved, and purchase feed costs have dropped. This approach has enhanced both environmental and economic sustainability. Every farm, regardless of size, can implement some or all of this approach. The data collection required to calculate the balance is not arduous. Nutrient mass balance analysis of farmsteads can raise awareness of the opportunities to reduce nutrient imports and their associated costs, and incentivize dairymen to adopt nutrient-reducing management practices. Every pound of nitrogen and phosphorus that we don't import is a pound that we don't have to worry about ending up in our water. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McMahon. Your comments as it relates to both labor and as well as the environmental stewardship that you have stated as an example of what in fact can be done. And I always believe that farmers in general and dairymen and women are among the best stewards of the environment, because the whole notion of sustainability is crucial for them to maintain their business. And it just, I think, is common sense. Our next witness was previously identified, the Director of Strategic Partnerships from the College of Agriculture, Food and Natural Resources, Associate Extension Professor in Agriculture and Applied Economics in the University of Missouri. Dr. Brown, good to have you here.
Thank you, and thanks for the kind introduction, Congresswoman Hartzler, and everything that you do for the folks in the 4th District of Missouri. Chairman Costa, Ranking Member Rouser, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding the financial situation for U.S. dairy farmers and the expected results from the dairy policy changes made in the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018. I'm an agricultural extension economist at the University of Missouri, and I have spent much of my career examining dairy industry issues. Since the record-setting milk prices received in 2014, prices have been at lower levels and shown less volatility. Over the 2010 to 2014 period, there was a range of $11.10 from the high to low monthly price, while over the 2015 to early 2019 period, the difference between the maximum and minimum has been only $4.40. While the low milk price during these two periods is very similar, the highest monthly price since 2015 is well below the maximum over the 2010 to 2014 period. The factors that have led to this longer period of more stable but lower milk prices are a combination of many market factors. Despite an incredibly tough environment for dairy producers across the country, milk supplies have continued to expand. The most recent USDA milk production report showed for the first time since January of 2016 a 0.4 decline in production relative to year earlier levels. The longer-term expansion in milk production occurred despite continued reductions in the number of dairy operations. The number of licensed dairy operations fell by over 2,700 or 6.8% in 2018 as financial stress pushed many of these operations out of business. If the recent decline in milk supplies continue, that could provide even more milk price strength in the second half of 2019. However, the structural change in dairy operations and milk production that has unfolded over the past few years highlights the increased possibility of these longer periods of low profitability. The stubborn growth in U.S. milk supplies over the last few years has contributed to the tough financial conditions that have plagued the industry. Dairy operation equity built during the record 2014 Milk prices and the apparent economies of scale in the industry has left aggregate milk supplies very unresponsive in time periods that are financially strapped. Despite slow supply response in low return periods, the industry can expand rapidly in periods of strong profitability. The cost of purchasing feed has fallen the last few years. However, the costs required to grow feedstuffs have remained high and created additional financial strain for those growing a significant portion of their feed. Poor domestic demand for some dairy products has contributed to the weakness in milk prices. Per capita consumption of 2% in low-fat milk has declined by 33 pounds over the 2010 to 2018 period and has not been offset by the recent increases in whole-fat fluid milk consumption. U.S. dairy exports are important to the outlook for U.S. dairy farmers. According to USDA's U.S. commercial dairy exports grew by 36 billion pounds on a milk equivalent skim solids basis over the 2000 to 2018 period, while domestic disappearance grew by only 23 billion pounds. The point remains that growth in U.S. dairy exports is vital. The implementation of new trade agreements, like the current efforts with China and the ratification of the new USMCA agreement, remain critical. The long-term outlooks provided by FAPRI and USDA estimate that the U.S. all milk price will not exceed $18 per hundred on an annual basis until after 2022. These forecasts suggest a slow recovery that occurs over the next 3 to 4 years, barring some external and anticipated shock. The new dairy provisions contained in the 2018 Farm Bill considerably strengthen the dairy safety net relative to the provisions in the 2014 Farm Bill. The level of coverage has increased and the cost of program participation has declined. It remains important to highlight the strengthened provisions contained in the 2018 Farm Bill. Those that would have picked $9.50 coverage will already have seen a payment in January of $1.51 a hundred and $1.28 a hundred in February, making 2019 decision easy. The current dairy margin coverage program is a milk price less feed cost triggered program and is meant to protect against low milk prices and/or high feed costs. The DMC margin is calculated on a national basis by using the most commonly used national prices for milk, corn, alfalfa, and soybean meal. The margin will not perfectly represent any particular farmer's margin, but provides a national average margin. The DMC program is a voluntary program that allows a dairy farmer to pick a margin level to protect between $4 and $9.50 with higher premiums at higher margin levels. Producers can cover between 5 and 95% of their FSA calculated production history. The first 5 million pounds of production history covered occurs at lower premiums relative to the production history covered above 5 million pounds. It appears the DMC program will provide a needed boost to the dairy safety net. The combination of lower premiums, added flexibility in production history covered, and higher margin protection levels result in a more effective safety program than the dairy industry has had for some time. Dairy producers, regardless of size, must examine how DMC program fits into their overall risk management plan. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the many issues facing the dairy industry today. I look forward to answering questions.
We thank you, Dr. Brown, for those very important facts that explain the challenges that the industry has felt in the past and where we are today, and we look forward to a good opportunity to go over any questions at that time. Our last witness is Mr. David Smith. He's the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Dairymen's Association. He's been previously introduced by Congressman Thompson. He's an active dairy farmer near Palmyra, Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Smith. Please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Costa, Ranking Member Rosier, and members of the House Committee for Agriculture, we want to thank you for this opportunity, this awesome opportunity to provide testimony today and hosting this hearing. Again, as you mentioned, I do have a farm operation, and my son Joel is the 5th generation on that farm operation right now. In addition, I am the Executive Director of the Dairymen's Association, which is a supporting organization of dairy and agricultural programs within Pennsylvania. I'd like to begin by discussing two key components of the 2018 Farm Bill, offer a brief overview of the state of Pennsylvania's dairy economy, and then provide 5 key points of recommendations for your consideration. First of all, thanks to the committee for the hard work that went into the 2018 Farm Bill. That legislation contains several key things that were supportive of the dairy industry. First of all, as mentioned earlier, the DMC coverage is a positive move for dairy farmers. Secondly, I wanted to add that the Farm Bill included a very innovative and new farm-to-food bank program, which is probably as you hear very often that it's a good and very logical program coming out of Congress that connects the dots between surplus ag products and the nation's food banks. A comment that you probably hear often that it's good and logical. I would go on to talk a little bit about the Pennsylvania dairy industry. And according to the USDA Census of Agriculture, Pennsylvania lost 915 dairy farms between 2000 and 2017. I would add that last year we continued to undergo significant consolidation and loss of farms and cows, and our herd numbers dropped 30,000 head last year alone, with a decrease of production of 6.9% decrease in milk production. The financial stress of our dairy farmers is real, as you've heard before. I've personally seen dairy farm families, friends struggle with seismic change and within their family business model, with some selling their farms, businesses, and others seeing the painful loss of their family farm. To help address challenges currently faced by dairy industry in Pennsylvania across the country, in my written remarks, I do have a number of things that have been mentioned prior to this. The trade is hugely important to dairy, and I won't go into details. It's in the written policy. I'd also mention that the continual review of the federal milk marketing orders is needed to keep monitoring those things. In addition, as you heard before, also a workable guest worker program needed year-round is very necessary. The two items that I want to address that I am very, very passionate about, our dairy farmers have worked hard over generations to build on a wholesome, nutritious image that milk now has. Dairy cow milk is unrivaled as a beverage of nutrition, and in recent years, many upstart beverages have now used milk in their labeling. These alternative beverages are riding on the coattails of an affordable, wholesome nutrition of cow's milk. I do believe that in general, consumers are aware of the difference in nutrition, but I believe and am concerned that many consumers still do not know the difference in nutrition of real milk and the nut juices. I think they are being misled by the virtue of the name milk in the label, and they are not getting a comparable product to milk. Dairy farmers across the country call for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to vigorously enforce food standards regarding the labeling of dairy products and prohibit the misleading, deceptive labeling of nut and plant-based beverages as real milk. Finally, our dairy farmers have been incredibly discouraged by the lack of choice of whole milk in school lunches. I believe that what started as an attempt to curb childhood obesity has done the opposite. In 2010, Congress passed the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act, which amended nutrition standards in the school lunch program and mandated that flavored milk must be fat-free within the program. I believe that this has led to significant changes in beverage consumption habits of children, and it has resulted in a 9% decline in milk consumption in schools. This 9% decline tells me that an additional 9% of our children in this country are not getting the calcium and the 9 essential vitamins of milk. We've made progress in 2017, allowing the 1% into our schools, but it's now time to draw on recent and new science-based research on dietary fats. Without the option of having a full-bodied beverage to satisfy an appetite, our children are seeking sugar-based drinks. I recently had a conversation with a mother of an elementary-age child. She mentioned her child likes milk at home, but does not like it at school, does not like the taste, and does not drink it there. I believe that we've lost a generation of milk drinkers. I want to thank Congressman Thompson and Peterson on their leadership of House Bill 832, the Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Acts of 2019. In conclusion, my wife Sharon and I became first-time grandparents last year. And while it's true what I've heard, that grandparenting is truly the best job that one could have, it's unfathomable to me that in a nation that prides itself in allowing choices and freedoms, my grandchild could enter a school and not even have the option of whole milk with her lunch.
I think that's a good note to end it on.
I'm humbled to be here. Thank you.
We thank you. I did not mention to exceed the 5-minute rule, and the reason that we have the lights that are before you there, and the chair's in a good mood this morning and gave you the benefit of the doubt of exceeding more than a minute of your 5 minutes. So we appreciate that, Mr. Thompson. You owe me one. We are going to defer to our chair, Mr. Peterson, who's being called for another meeting, for an opportunity to ask a question that he wants to pursue before the committee hearing ends. So, Chairman Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question for Sadie. You've, I assume, looked at the new margin coverage program, and have you made a decision on your farm about what you're going to do?
Yes, we have, Chairman Peterson. We will enroll for all 5 years at the 950 level, and we will opt to take the 75% credit on the premiums that we paid for the margin protection program.
Good. Well, you're on the ball. See, we've been out educating our constituents, and apparently they're listening, so that's good.
Yes.
And Sadie and her family do a wonderful job representing their area, as you can see. So thanks for being here today, and that's it. I'll give it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Peterson, for your leadership of this, of our House Agriculture Committee, and we continue to look forward to work with you on this effort and a host of other issues we're dealing with. I want to remind members that we will be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who were here at the start of the hearing, and after that, members will be recognized in the order of their arrival. And I've got a list here, and if you care to check where you are on that list, come up and see me. With that said, I will begin with my questioning. Andre, in your comments, you talked about the importance of trade and for America's dairy industry and in California. A 2018 study estimated that current retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. will decrease dairy exports possibly by as much as $415 million in 2019. What would your view as a successful resolution currently to the ongoing dispute with China?
Sure. Thank you for the question. The Chinese market's an interesting market for us because prior to any of the current discussions around China and the activity that we've had that began in 2018, the United States was not on a level playing field with our primary competitors in New Zealand and Australia. They had the ability to send product in at reduced tariffs for a significant amount of product in the beginning of each year. That's put us at a competitive disadvantage. As time went on and the retaliatory tariffs came in place, 25% tariff came on most dairy products and 10% on infant formula over and above the current tariffs, which put us way out of line. In the U.S. cheese market, we were a primary supplier to pizzas in China. That business has virtually gone away. For California dairies, we ship just under $100 million.
Who's taken that business?
The business primarily will be taken by New Zealand, Australia, the EU.
That's part of a problem with, I think, and I regret that we pulled out of the TPP. I've asked Secretary Perdue whether or not he thinks at some point, and Ambassador Lighthouser, there may be a reconsideration of becoming a part of that effort. Do you think that would make a difference?
Yes. To answer your initial question, what would be a successful outcome? It's not to go back where we were a year ago. It's getting a level playing field against all of our competitors in China, so a more robust agreement. But TPP, the Pacific Rim, is the most valuable part to the U.S. dairy industry. It has the ability to lift prices in the United States. TPP agreements, including countries like Japan, are critically important to us.
Thank you. Dr. Brown, you recently released a report that shows that implementing the higher standards of non-fat solids across the country can increase milk prices and offset some of the losses that the dairy industry has experienced. We've had these standards in place in California for many years. What are some of the other impacts, do you think, that adopting these standards might have for the broader U.S. dairy industry?
I think when you look at powder prices as a result of adopting those higher fortification standards across the country, we certainly will talk about higher non-fat dry prices. Part of the longer-term results of that is maybe some additional milk supplies occurring in the country as we get higher all milk prices. The results of that study would have shown about 70-cent higher U.S. all milk prices in the first year, but by the time we get 5 or 10 years down the road, more like 15-cent additional higher U.S. all milk prices as additional supplies drive down things like cheese prices and butter prices as well.
Yeah, more nutrition, better tasting milk, it seems like a no-brainer.
You certainly can talk about the demand effects of that. I've looked for a lot of studies that said higher solids milk creates new consumer demand, which is ultimately the win here if we can find these products that create new demand.
Seems to me like we in the subcommittee ought to be looking to figure out ways in which we can move that forward. For all the witnesses that are here, those that have not commented, if you care to, we all know about the crisis that the industry has felt over the last 10 years, the loss of dairies and why we're where we are today. Would any of you care to opine in terms of what you'd like to see the United States Department of Agriculture focus on implementing these dairy provisions that we worked so hard on last year? Sadie?
Thank you, Chairman Costa. I would just urge the USDA to move forward with the implementation as quickly as possible. I know that there's, talked about a June 17th rollout with possible payments in July, but there are farmers for
No, we need it now. We're trying to push them.
right for whom those 3 months will be a stretch.
No, and it's hard to convince your bank that, relief is coming. Mr. McMahon?
I completely agree with what Sadie said, that we really need to push this through, probably more for the sake of the medium and smaller size farms. I think, personally, I think our industry can be impacted more by the trade things that Andre was talking about.
I think the trade's very important, and I think there's a bipartisan concurrence here. Mr. Smith, you wish to add anything?
No, I just concur with what they're saying about trade. It's a huge significance to dairy.
Thank you. I will defer at this point to the ranking member, Mr. Rouser, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Costa. I want to focus in on the trade aspect here real quick, particularly USMCA. And in my simple mind, the way I do an analysis of things is I take all the various moving parts and I set aside everything and just make it static and focus on, one particular item to try to determine, the true impact. Obviously, there are a lot of factors that drive price, a ton of different factors that drive price. But if you took everything today and you made it static and you just focused on USMCA, the impact of USMCA on price, any one of you have any real sense of the impact of that? Or conversely, let's say that nothing happens, the price impact, of that scenario, assuming that you keep all other variables constant at the moment, if you follow me. Anybody? Andre?
Maybe I'll take a stab at it. If we don't have a USMCA and we lose the Mexican business, I believe the U.S. domestic price will drop substantially, as much as 5 to 10%. Why is that? Mexico takes up about 25% of the total exported product. Right now, there's a 25% tariff, retaliatory tariff on cheese. It slowed the cheese business down. If this is signed and the retaliatory tariffs are lifted, I believe it could give as much as a 3 or 5% increase in milk prices. The reason USMCA is important for another reason is because of the Canadian equation. We would have liked to have had more access, but there's been predatory pricing with their Class 7 arrangement where they've gone in the world market and undercut prices on skim milk powder, which does have an effect on the U.S. So putting some controls around the Class 7 pricing should also give a lift to our prices. So I believe a signing of that is good for the industry. Not having it will be very bad for the industry.
Yeah. Of course, and there are a number of us that pushed very, very hard, myself included, and pushed the administration to really focus in on getting rid of the Class 6 and Class 7, very manipulative. Just how manipulative are those two programs the Canadians have?
Want me to take a stab at your asking kind of a follow-up, how manipulative? What happens is they had a shortage of milk fat in Canada. They found a way to expand the milk fat, but milk can be divided into pieces. And when you take the milk and the cream off, you've got non-fat dry milk left. In the United States, we call it non-fat dry milk. In the world market, you standardize it to Codex standards, standardized protein levels and that, and you call it skim milk powder. So they've taken skim milk powder, and here they have one of the highest prices in the world on milk, and they're selling their skim milk powder at one of the lowest prices in the world, which doesn't make any sense at all. They're finding a way basically to dump the unneeded parts of the product up in Canada, which has disrupted the world marketplace. Now, albeit it's small, so I'd call it more of an irritant than a crisis, but it's a problem that needs to be addressed.
I want to move on to the immigration issue real quick since there's a minute, 40 seconds left. A number of you, I think every single one of you mentioned access to labor as being a critical issue for you. If you can talk about that and elaborate on that, particularly specific examples, just how hard is it to find a legal, reliable labor source?
Well, I think, Ranking Member, that, you know, my opening statement about the W-2s that my wife was putting out there, averaging $39 a year for 10 full-time positions, it is that difficult. My average worker on my farm is making $39,000 a year plus a 3-bedroom house plus all utilities, and if they're a migrant worker, they get free transportation to wherever they need to go as well. So it's not a matter of how much we're paying. It's just, you know, part of it is demographics. I'm one of 10 children, Irish Catholic birth control. And I personally have 3 children, and my brother and partner has 2. So, you know, demographically, we don't have these big farm families anymore. And subsequently, as we move further and further away from production agriculture, which really only about 1% of the population is in that now, you don't have those families and those, you know, cousins and like that can come and work on the farm. So it's lost to them. So,
yeah. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you very
time's
much.
expired.
Your time is expired, but we thank you. Actually, you gave us a little time. Good for you. Good for us. Our next member is the gentleman from New York, Congressman Brindisi.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McMahon, I do want to pick up a little bit on that topic we were just discussing, because although immigration isn't the jurisdiction of this committee, we here on the Agriculture Committee are talking to farmers on a daily basis and hearing about their workforce needs all the time. So I guess what would an ideal guest worker program look like? I know talking to other farmers, the H-2A program is pretty cumbersome. It doesn't work for dairy because it's not year-round. What would an ideal program look like for dairy workers, dairy farmers?
well, quickly, Mr. Brindisi, I would start by allowing both producers and workers to come forward without fear of punishment. I think at that point, workers that are here already should be vetted, and anybody who doesn't make the grade or has a felony or whatever in their background shouldn't be here. I think once they're vetted, a fine or fee, whatever you'd like to call it, could be assessed for that worker, which employers would gladly pay. And then beyond that, I think it needs to be set up so that agriculture could be the only industry that could request new workers to come in. I think at that point, if they're vetted by the consulate in their country of origin, they should be issued a card of some kind. I know it's been called the blue card, whatever. And then that would allow them legal work in this country for, say, 3 years and then automatically roll over for 3 more. I would think that after say, 6 years, perhaps those workers could be allowed to move into a different industry, but within those first 6 years, they could move farm to farm, but not out of agriculture. And farmers would be glad, like myself, to have E-Verify and a swipe machine, as long as we had these cards for these people. I think they should be allowed to travel back and forth to their country of origin. One of our workers' father died in February, and there wasn't a thing he could do about it. He couldn't go home and bury his dad. That's sad. Beyond that, I think that if someone in farming needed another worker, that I think they would have to show cause. They would have to do diligence locally to try to find labor locally and prove that they did before they could request a worker from another country. And at that point, someone could be vetted by the consulate and allowed to come in and take that spot. I just think that it doesn't need to be as difficult as what we've heard over the years. I've been working on this since 2000, and I sure would like to see it come to fruition.
I think we all would. Just real quick, I want to ask a question on the dairy margin coverage sign-up. I know we're approaching June 17th, and USDA has traditionally included multiple forms of contact, like postcards, forums, and broad coordination with the dairy industry. Given the challenges that dairy producers have faced for years now, it's important that this outreach captures all producers, not just those who signed up for the old program. So this really is open to any witness. In your opinion, are dairy farmers across the country, are they aware of this new dairy margin coverage program and how it could potentially help them? Are they signing up for it? Sadie?
Mr. Brindisi, I think the awareness that the program exists is growing. Full understanding of how the program will factor into that farm's business plan is not quite where it should be on all farms yet.
Okay. What can we do to get the word out there? What can USDA do? Do you think forums around the country, or what can we do to make sure that the word is getting out there so farmers are taking advantage of it?
I think once the Farm Service Agency understands how the sign-up process will work, Farm Service Agency has done a good job in the past of providing education and consult for farmers. So once the Farm Service Agency has the tools in their hand to continue the outreach process, that will help some of those farmers that are still making those decisions about their sign-up level.
Okay. Any other suggestions?
I agree with Sadie on that, Mr. Brindisi, because FSA is very good about getting things out in the newsletter just as soon as they have a handle on what it is they can do.
I think Andre had a comment.
I was just going to make a comment. Just most of the big cooperatives in the United States have got programs to try to make sure everyone's educated, because this is a wonderful opportunity. And I don't want to take anything away from the program, because we're highly enthusiastic of what happened in the Farm Bill and highly enthusiastic of what happened with the Revenue Protection Program. But the average cow-sized dairy in California is 1,400 cows and a 5 million pound cap. While it was great to move 4 to 5 million pounds, only covers a 200 cow dairy, which means most of the dairies in California only have coverage on about 1/7 of their total production. So I'm highly enthusiastic. I don't want to say we're being critical, but it would really be nice maybe at some point to be able to open that up a little bit farther for the larger dairies. Right now, it's very good for the smaller and medium-sized dairies.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman from New York, and I think one of the areas that the subcommittee is going to work on, I hope aggressively with the Department of Agriculture, is to make sure that dairymen and women across the country get all the options that are available under the new Farm Bill, and so that they are well informed. We talked about with the Farm Services Agency, the FSA offices around the country, that they make sure that they have all the information at hand available to brief the dairymen in their area. And I would suggest to members, one of the things that I'm doing is holding a workshop here in the next 6 weeks, inviting all the dairies in my area to come and meet with the FSA and make sure that they understand what all their options are, not only with the 5 million pound cap, but the insurance program beyond and how that might help the larger dairies as well. So with that said, our next member is the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson.
Chairman, thank you. Thank you to you and Ranking Member for hosting this. We know that as we worked on the last Farm Bill and we looked at the state of the national economy, specifically in rural America, farm income decline was significant over the past 6 years. And a lot of that was due to two commodities. One we're not talking about today, it's cotton, but the other one we are talking about today, and I'm very appreciative of that, is dairy. And I do think in the 2014 Farm Bill, we had a safety net program when it came out of the committee, was pretty good, would have done the job. And unfortunately, it got meddled with by other parts of this body outside the Agriculture Committee. And they changed that program and made it fit into their financial needs, and quite frankly, it failed. I'm very appreciative of Ranking Member Conaway and his role as chairman to defend the product of this body, this committee, with the dairy margin coverage program when it came out of this committee this time around, and I have a tremendous amount of confidence. Mr. Smith, in your testimony, you made reference to the improved dairy margin coverage program, the Farm Bill. I want to follow up with you specifically on Pennsylvania. What's your sense of how familiar Pennsylvania producers are with the new program? Is there a problem with the bad experience they had from the 2014 version? And is there anything that, that maybe discouraged them from signing up with this new and improved, of what I think will be an effective tool? And is there anything you think we should be done to help further inform producers?
In answer to your question, yes, I do believe that the 2014 Farm Bill and that coverage put a damper on things, and it was not successful to our Pennsylvania farmers. And I don't think going forward it is more difficult to convince them that the next program is beneficial for them. So I think it's an uphill battle to educate the dairy farmers there of a better product. I think we had some suggestions earlier here about educating. I think it's going to be a continual process to try to pull more people into that understanding of a better product. I like to spend about 35% of my time on the safety net issue, but I like to spend, when it comes to dairy, 65% of my time on the market, because, till we get around to this, I want the safety net to be effective, but I just don't want to, I don't want us to need the safety net now. And so one of the things that we were successful in was mentioned, fortunately not in this committee, but unfortunately in the Education and Labor Committee back in 2010, there was a change of the school nutrition standards, and we basically demonized that. I didn't vote for it, but it was demonized milk fat. And as Mr. Smith said, we did lose an entire generation of milk drinkers. Some of them are parents today. They didn't have a great milk experience then, and I'm very appreciative that Secretary Perdue has granted waivers for schools to offer 1% flavored varieties. I was at an incredible vocational agriculture career day in one of my schools. They actually had 9 other schools come in. It was pretty cool, actually, to see these kids learn about opportunities in agriculture. And I had lunch with them, and I was very pleased to sit down and have a great glass of 1% chocolate milk. We are, as was said, proud to be working with Chairman Peterson with Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act to allow a resumption of really the nutrition that kids need, but also to have them have a good milk experience. And so anecdotally, I'm seeing fluid milk, whole milk sales up. That's all anecdotal. Trying to work with USDA so we can track that a little closer as a result of a new generation of milk drinkers. Just wanted to weigh in and see what your thoughts were in terms of that, how important it is. And I know that won't be through this committee. It's another committee, Education and Labor, of restoring whole milk options, not mandating it, but options in our school meals. Sadie.
Congressman Thompson, I applaud the efforts to return whole milk to schools, because we all know that whole milk tastes leagues better than its skim version. However, to return whole milk to schools, we will also need to increase calorie limits in the school lunch so that school lunch program coordinators can include that option for students without being penalized in their calorie counts.
Right, restore it or exempt. The other thing is to exempt beverages. Nothing unreasonable about that as well. Thank you, Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I think we pursue this as an effort of the subcommittee, and I think we do it on the basis of nutrition. I think that's the key. The next member is the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Congresswoman Craig, the land of lakes and milk, right?
That's exactly right. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit a statement for the record first on behalf of the National Farmers Union President, Roger Johnson, please.
Certainly, without objection, we'll deem the statement adopted for the record.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make it very clear to my colleagues this morning that when it comes to the dairy farmers in my district, we're talking about families who have known no other life than dairy farming their entire lives. In my district, in Wabasha and in Goodhue County, we've lost roughly 15% of our dairy farmers since 2012. Our family dairy farmers are part of the central fabric of greater Minnesota. These family farmers aren't asking for much. They just want a fair shot to make enough money to raise a family and pass that farm on to the next generation. They are resilient and hardworking people, but the last year has become too much for many of these families. Last week, during the in-district work period, I had the opportunity to host a rural mental health listening session in my district. I heard from dairy farmers like Deborah Mills from Lake City, Minnesota, about the mental stress of dairy farming. She shared that, quote, the economic reality of stagnant milk prices, rising costs, and disappearing profit margins have taken a toll on farmers' mental health. The state of the dairy economy is truly heartbreaking right now. However, I'm especially thankful for the promise that the 2018 Farm Bill gives many of our small dairy farmers. I want to start my question with Ms. Frerichs from Minnesota. As you may know, the median income of dairy farms surveyed in Minnesota dropped by 2/3 last year, from $43,000 to less than $15,000. You mentioned in your testimony that last year you pursued a line of credit for the first time to continue paying your vendors. Can you describe the credit conditions in your area, particularly for small dairy farms, and who do you turn to for advice when it comes to credit and financing?
Thank you, Congresswoman Craig. I will answer the second part of your question first. We work very closely with our Farm Business Management Instructor, which is a program in Minnesota that helps farmers become better business managers. So this individual helps us analyze each enterprise on our farm for profitability and areas of improvement. We meet with him first to establish our cash flow for the year and determine where there might be some gaps and some need for credit. Then we proceed with those numbers to our lenders at either the Farm Service Agency or our local credit union. I've heard our relationship with our lender is still in a positive place. This is the first year that we've had to look for additional credit. I've heard that it's not as promising for farms that are rolling into their second, third, or fourth year of needing additional credit. I can't speak to what those farms are hearing for answers, but I just know that it's not as good as it could be.
Thank you. I just want to follow up to you, Ms. Frerichs, as well. When we talk about the dairy revenue protection, which is obviously a relatively new private insurance product approved by USDA, why did you decide to use this product, and how do you expect it to impact your farm specifically?
Sure, thank you. We decided to use this product because it offers a risk management tool that sets a floor for our price. I certainly hope that we don't use it and we don't receive an indemnity, because that means that prices have improved or market access has allowed prices to improve. But it gives us a position of security in the event of a catastrophic market failure. You know, when we started farming, they told us that we'd never see $9 milk again. They promised us that, sitting at the table, that you could build your cash flow based on $12 milk. And 2 years later, we found $9 milk. So had we had a price floor program like this in place at that time, we could have stemmed the loss considerably.
Thank you. And finally, I just want to talk about trade for 1 second. Mr. Mikowski, an industry study found that retaliatory tariffs issued by China and Mexico on dairy products will decrease farm revenues by about $16.6 billion and endanger 8,200 U.S. jobs over the next 5 years unless they are ended. What are the long-term impacts if these retaliatory tariffs don't end to our farmers?
I think the first is we'll see a drop in milk prices. And if you see a drop in milk prices, it just exacerbates the issue that we have on farm. You know, there were two things that affected milk prices last year. One was the EU interfering with the dairy industry with the intervention stocks. They built up way too much product, and it took 2 or 3 years and expanded this period of time that we had very low prices. Once those things moved out, which was last year at extraordinarily low prices, the retaliatory tariffs kicked in, and it's just been a double effect on the dairy farms. We absolutely, because of where we are today, well, if you think about it, if we didn't have the exports, 15% of the milk would come back into the United States, and it'd be devastating to our industry. We'd lose a significant number of smaller farms, maybe not necessarily the larger ones. It would be disastrous. Trade is critically important. It's the single biggest issue right now, I think, for the dairy industry and dairy pricing.
Thank you. Now you're back, Mr.
We thank the gentlewoman, and we thank Andre for your response. Our next member is Congresswoman Hartzler from the great state of Missouri.
Yeah.
The show-me state, right?
That's right. That's right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I think our committee is fortunate to have somebody who has a family history in the dairy industry helping to lead this charge. And thank all the witnesses here today, and I want to start out and dovetail onto what my colleague just shared about the heartache of so many dairy farmers having to sell out. Even last year, our close family friend who had grown up with you know, they had a 3-generation dairy farm there in Cass County, and they sold out. And hopefully with the passage of the Farm Bill and the new program that we put in place, that won't happen, and we can reverse that trend, and the farmers can get help. So I wanted to start with Dr. Brown. Thank you again for being here. Thanks for your expertise. Could you just say, what do you believe is the most important message to get out to dairy farmers about the changes in the dairy title in the 2018 Farm Bill?
I think the most important thing is to remind them it's not the 2014 Farm Bill. It's not the Margin Protection Program, that this is a new program. The fact that we're going to talk about the ability to now sign up for $9.50, where under the 14 Farm Bill we were capped at $8, that $1.50 over the last 18 years increases the probability of a payment by about 30%. So about 40% of the time, if you would have taken $8 MPP coverage, you would have gotten a payment. If you take $9.50 now over that same period, you would have gotten a payment about 70% of the time. We have to really make sure we send home the message, this program is different than MPP. And by the way, it's less expensive for you as well. Premium costs are much lower.
What is the University of Missouri Extension doing to help get the word out about this? We've talked about the important role of the FSA. So just kind of wondered there at the university as well as across the country, what are all you doing to try to help get the word out?
Yeah, I think when you look at all the land grants across the United States, we're all trying to work together with FSA in that education. Sometimes I think FSA can talk to producers about the mechanics of how the program works. Maybe we can go one step further as land grant institutions to say, here are some of the outcomes that you get, or potential outcomes that you get. So I think we work in combination. We've already reached out in Missouri to our Missouri FSA office to make certain that we do meetings together with them as we try to educate on DMC.
Sure, and I really related to what you were sharing, Mr. Smith, about the school lunches and thing. I'm a former home economics teacher myself. very involved in encouraging the new dietary guidelines that are being made at the USDA, that they do it based on science, based on fact. And I'm hopeful that under the new process, we're going to have some guidelines that'll be very helpful to us. I was wondering what your industry is doing in this process. Are you weighing in with the USDA and keeping a close eye on the dietary guidelines as they are being developed?
I think the opportunity for input to USDA on those dietary guidelines is there. It is ongoing communication, and I think everybody in the industry needs to have that communication with USDA, and that's very important. But thank you for understanding that there is new information on dietary guidelines and good fat versus bad fat.
Sure. Well, I just want to go on the record, let everybody know my beverage of choice is milk, and I love milk. And I as a former teacher, I think, you know, it is important that our kids have the opportunity to drink milk and to grow up with it. I know when I was teaching several years ago, the dairy industry was very involved in providing classrooms with posters of baseball players that had the milk thing there and some classroom supplies for the elementary teachers. I think that's very important. Are you still involved in trying to work with the teachers and educate students about the benefits of milk?
Well, absolutely. The dairy industry in the United States has a mandatory checkoff program that our dairy farmers contribute money to promotion programs. And what you've mentioned is part of that promotion throughout the country, educating young consumers, school-age children about the benefits of milk. So it is ongoing. It's a challenge of a limited number of dollars to reach a huge number of individuals.
Sure. And my final quick question back to Dr. Brown. What are the 3 key issues that you're watching to gauge where milk prices are headed for the remainder of this year?
I think number one is just what's going to happen to aggregate milk supplies. We're actually down for the first time in several months. That could really be positive for the second half of this year. And then I think the trade side is most important, the growth that we need there for higher prices. So those are really the 2 keys for me, I guess, as we look through the remainder of 2019.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
All right. I thank the gentlewoman. Our next member is the gentleman from California, whose district and mine border one another, and one of our rising stars in California, represents a lot of milk country, Congressman Josh Harder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much to all our witnesses for joining to discuss some of the real challenges that I see facing our dairy industry. As the chairman said, I represent the California Central Valley, and if you've ever seen those, you know, happy cows come from California, that's us. They're all from my district, none of them in the chairman's. And obviously, we have a real history of the dairy industry, stretching back generations. It's one of the most critical keys to agriculture and to jobs. In my district alone, we have about 7,000 people that are directly employed by the dairy industry, and it contributes about $6 billion every year to our economy. But obviously, the indirect effects are even bigger. And no matter what job you hold in the Central Valley, whether or not you're working at a supermarket, working at a hospital, how the dairy industry is doing affects everyone. And I hear again and again how much tougher things are going. I mean, I think we've lost about 600 dairy operations just in the last 10 years alone in California. In my district, we've seen about 90 dairy operations close in Stanislaus County and San Joaquin. And when I talk to our dairy farmers, I hear a lot of different perspectives on this. I was talking to one of our prominent farmers, a guy by the name of Ray Souza from Stanislaus County the other day, and he told me that this sustained period of low prices and negative margins is something he's never seen. It's not only the depth of the dairy depression, but also the length of the period. And I think that's a sentiment that I hear underscored a lot. It's not just the fact that the price of milk has dropped by a third in the last 5 years. It's how long this is going on. Mr. Mikovelski, I'd really love to hear from you. What do you see as the drivers behind the slow recovery in domestic prices?
Sure, it's pretty simple, and I had mentioned it earlier. The EU intervention stocks played havoc on the world market. And then trade has created an issue and slowed it down. But I'd like to just build on a point, because I mentioned those that Dr. Brown mentioned. He was talking about the worldwide supply of milk. And when the intervention stocks were going on in Europe, the Europeans continued to produce when market signals told them they shouldn't be producing. The United States, I don't believe, has got a couple of months with a negative supply growth over the last couple of years. So market signals are not going back to the farmers as they should, so that we can get the supply-demand imbalance. Now, the nice part of that is the intervention stocks are gone and the Europeans have actually seen a downturn. To Dr. Scott's point, in March, it was the first time we've seen a contraction in U.S. milk supply by, I think, 0.4% in quite some time. The other thing, which is a big thing to the world market, is the New Zealanders, while they're in their off-season because of Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere issues, are down about 6% year-on-year in growth, which means the worldwide supply is drying up and the demand is not. If you look at powder prices, they've escalated 3 to 5% in the last week. Fat prices are really good. And if we could eliminate the tariffs on cheese, we would see a recovery, I think, in the markets. But to specifically answer your question, it's milk supply, it's supply demand, and the intervention stocks and trade. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. One of the other things that I hear a lot when I talk to our local dairymen is the challenges faced by the labor shortage. And California as a whole, I mean, everywhere in agriculture, 2/3 of our farmers have a labor shortage, but it feels especially acute with our dairy industry, given some of the needs of a year-round labor force and the challenges faced by not being included in the H-2A program and others. And I hear again and again that it's impossible to maintain a reliable workforce. And I also hear that it's not about cost. It's actually about making sure that we actually have availability of the labor force. I know this is more on the Immigration Committee than the Agriculture Committee, but obviously it's something that I work on very closely. Mr. Michalewski, I'd love to go again for the California perspective. What are you hearing? Are you hearing the same thing? And what do you actually think we need to do to get our labor shortage addressed?
Yeah, let me just build on some of the earlier points rather than repeat what was said in the sense of time. I agree with the earlier points. A question was asked about what we would like to see in immigration, and this has a direct effect on California. The one thing that wasn't mentioned was the touchback program, which is occasionally mentioned. Milking cows has been pointed out as a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day, 365. It's really hard to send people home for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Touchback, issues coming back in. So specific to California, where almost 100% of our labor on farm is immigration labor, touchback programs are difficult. E-Verify is okay if you have a agriculture or guest worker program in advance, but this is a massive issue for California for our dairy farmers.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, time to get to some solutions.
Okay, we thank the gentleman, and the next member is Congressmember Hagedorn, again, from the land of lakes and milk. Mr. Hagedorn.
Don't forget hogs. We've got a lot of hogs in our district, too. It's nice to be here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Rouser.
Thank you.
Witnesses, thanks very much, and a special thanks to Ms. Frerichs for being here from Minnesota and doing what you can for generational farming. And I want to associate myself with Chairman Peterson's remarks at the beginning, how important it is to keep our generational farmers in business when times are tough. Just last week, I was at a Farmers for Free Trade get-together just south of New Ulm, Minnesota, a smaller dairy farm run by the Hoffmans. And Mr. Hoffman, Steve, he in very emotional terms discussed how he and his son and his wife had to consider maybe leaving the business rather than expanding it. And it's, it's tough times, and we get it. And it's been 5 or 6 tough years, especially for dairy farmers. Times when the milk prices were low and somehow production went up, and it didn't seem to make sense. But I know the work of the committee and others to try to write that program and to make things better moving forward is very important. I think there are a number of ways that we, in bipartisan fashion, can work together in order to help all of our farmers. And one of those would be to get together. I think this committee, especially the way it works in bipartisan ways, should take the lead in this Congress to make sure that everyone knows that we support the new agreement with Mexico and Canada. Bringing certainty to the marketplace and expanding opportunities for our farmers would be very, very critical. And I think as a committee, if we can get together and demonstrate that type of bipartisanship, that would go a long ways. in making sure that when the president submits that agreement to Congress, that it gets a fair vote within 90 days. We need that. I also think that there are ways that we can look at good government. You know, they always say we don't want farmers going out of business for any reason other than it's just, you know, it's what they want to do. We don't want it because of bad government. Because when especially our generational farmers, when they sell out to bigger operators. Bigger operators are not bad folks, but it means fewer people working and living in our land, fewer people living in our rural communities, purchasing things on Main Street, going to our schools. It puts enormous pressure on rural America. And I think today, you know, we should be honest. One of the reasons that things are going as well as they are, and I know times are tough, is because some of those burdensome regulations like waters of the United States has been sidestepped to this point. That would be devastating for dairy and others if we had onerous regulations. Obamacare has been very tough on farmers. I speak with farmers all the time that are paying $20,000 and $30,000 a year for premiums with deductibles so high the underlying insurance is virtually worthless. And you talk about maybe leaving the farm, having somebody go into town for a job. Almost 99% of the time, it's because of health insurance that they're going to do that, because of those burdensome costs. I agree with the chairman, the ranking member, and others who said that we need a work program all year round for dairy. They haven't had the same deal as other parts of agriculture, but I think we need to be honest about it, that if we in bipartisan fashion don't support secure borders, what are the chances that we're going to get that through? And on top of that, any work program that we had will be circumvented. It will be undermined. So I think we have to get together in a number of ways in order to make sure that we stand firm for these common sense proposals, and we do it as Republicans and Democrats. I just like to say, you know, thank you for what you do. It's hard work. I grew up on a farm near Truman, Minnesota. My dad was a grain and livestock farmer. We had hogs. And I used to ask him, Dad, why do we have hogs instead of cows like some of our neighbors? And he says, Jimmy, I like to take a vacation. He said, if you're a dairy farmer, you're married to those cows, and it's all day, every day. And so I appreciate it. And what you do is so critically important for our country. We have an abundant, reliable, safe, affordable food supply. Every American wakes up every day and knows when they go to the grocery store, there are going to be those choices, diverse choices at affordable costs. And because of that, we are the envy of the world. So with that, I thank you for your testimony. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for his comments. And our next member is a gentleman who I've known for many years and his family. He represents one of the wonderful parts of California, the Central Coast, Congressman Jimmy Panetta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this hearing, appreciate this opportunity, and I want to thank the witnesses for their time being here, as well as their preparation, which I'm sure, especially based on your very professional testimony, all five of you, I know there was a lot of time spent in that preparation, so thank you for that. I come from the Central Coast of California, otherwise known as the salad bowl of the world. A lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, and they're, of course, Roger. Of course, that means that we don't rely on machines for our harvesting and our produce. We rely on people. And therefore, we have the same issues that you do as well. And I do not have much dairy. I admit that. I have one dairy farm, the Skoke Dairy Farms, out there in the Salinas area. But like I said, we have the same issues. There's no doubt about it, especially when it comes to immigration, especially when it comes to trade. Fortunately, I'm on the Ag Committee, I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, so I get to delve into both those topics. But obviously, being from the Central Coast and being a grandson of immigrants, immigration is very important to us. And Mr. Mcmahan, I really appreciate the list of, areas that you went through in regards to what an ideal worker program would look like. But I guess I also got to ask you about one other thing that I didn't hear from you. Now, I'm sure, I don't want any of you to answer this, but I'm sure you know many dairy farmers that have many employees that probably are undocumented, okay? Yet those same employees have probably worked for those employers for a very, very long time. And as an original author of the Blue Card Bill, as it's known as, it provides basically a way for those employees who have worked in ag and who will continue to work in ag to get legal permanent residence. So, Mr. McMahon, I got to ask you about that aspect of a worker program. People who have been in agriculture, who want to stay in agriculture. What about providing them with legal permanent residence as well?
Thanks for the question, Congressman. Two different occasions, I went down to Mexico and stayed at the village where my crew is from, and was able to experience the changes in their lives down there as a result of their working for me. And I can tell you that over the years, because we started January 1, 2000 with our Mexican workers, that I would dare say 75 to 80% of them don't want to stay here. And I have a PowerPoint presentation I've done all over the Northeast about my experiences going down there, seeing the homes they've built, seeing the money they've invested in their own businesses, seeing the investments they've made in their own schools to make their lives better down there. So when you hear about how they all want to stay here forever, I have a few that do, and I think that after so many years of being here, perhaps they should be allowed to move to a green card or something like that. I have no issue with that.
Okay, so basically, if there were those, I think you mentioned like 6 years or something was the number you threw out there.
Correct.
I mean, that's a full-time employee working, all those years. Wouldn't you be in agreement with maybe providing them with that sort of opportunity to have legal permanent residence if you had some people who are staying here and continue to be here? I mean, as you know, those are the best kind of employees.
Oh, absolutely. I got a couple of guys, I'd nail their feet to the ground if I could, so.
Exactly. And part of that, one of those nails would be an opportunity for legal permanent residency.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much. In regards to the USMCA, obviously, that's something, for agriculture, it keeps it the same for the most part. I know dairy, it definitely benefits many aspects of dairy. But let's say for some reason, okay, you're seeing the challenges that we're facing right now in Congress with the USMCA. Let's say for some reason we don't get an agreement on that. There are some in the administration that have mentioned basically withdrawing from NAFTA. Mr. Michalewski, would you choose to withdraw from NAFTA if we didn't get USMCA?
Andre's a lot easier for all of you. It's a tough last name.
Michalewski.
It's like make a left turn. Make a left ski if you run it all together.
Got it.
Well. To be perfectly honest, I mean, this is my opinion, maybe not of my own company. I think withdrawing from NAFTA would be disastrous for dairy. Dairy was in a unique position. I understand there's a lot of other industries and a lot of other things involved with USMCA. When it comes specific to dairy, without Mexico, we will have a precipitous drop in milk prices in the United States, and our dairy farmers will have more dairy farms go out of business. It's not even a possibility. It is a reality, I believe, and I think most of the other members of the panel would agree with that.
Understood. Thank you, and thanks to all of you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank Congressman Panetta, especially for bringing up that last question. It was one of the I wanted to follow up, and Andrew, I think that it's important to underline that frankly, walking away from NAFTA or USMCA, whatever we want to call it, would be a disaster in so many different ways. It accounts for 16% of America's trade between Mexico and Canada, which combined accounts for more trade than the next 8 countries we trade with, besides being our neighbors and our friends. So with that said, we have a gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon.
Thank you. I appreciate the chairman, and I appreciate being on this committee. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. I was raised on a beef farm, so I appreciate learning your perspective because dairy is such an important part of our nation, and it's also a very important part of Nebraska's economy as well. I would say that one of the top issues for Nebraska is passing the USMCA. And every change that was made to USMCA was made to our nation's advantage to include dairy. So we need to get that passed. So I appreciate Mr. Michalewski for your strong support, but I want to see if the other panels here agree. Is USMCA, should be a top priority for this Congress to pass?
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt.
Congressman.
Absolutely.
I think the forecasts we've seen are that trade is down for the first 2 months of the year, or at least January, as the reports have shown, and that's not the kind of news we want to see, and trade volumes might be holding, but with the tariffs in place, that's not that we're not turning those trades into dollars that we can pass back to farmers.
Well, I appreciate your feedback. I think this should be the #1 priority for Congress, is passing USMCA. It's important for our economy. It's important for the entire Midwest, for beef, dairy, corn, soybeans, you name it. We have to get this done. In fact, I was looking at some stats. About $50,000 for the average farmer in Nebraska comes from our trade with Canada and Mexico. That is a huge part of someone's income, so we have to get this done. Changing topics on you. When you talk to small businesses, medical care is the top 1 of 2 issues that they face, the cost of buying policies on their own on the market. Is this the case also for dairy farmers, dairy producers? And I'll just turn to whoever would like to answer.
We're talking healthcare, Congressman.
Right, yeah, the cost of, the cost of buying a premium on the market.
Yeah.
Or a policy, excuse me.
Well, thank God I turned 65 2 years ago, because life got a lot better when that happened, thanks to Medicare. But, yeah, my wife is still youthful, and just for her policy alone, it's like $1,200 a month. It's incredible. So healthcare is huge, and unfortunately, there's a lot of dairy farmers that would give that up to continue to keep their business going, and that's a sad issue as well. So,
And does that policy have a high deductible too? I imagine it does.
no, actually,
Okay.
actually, it's not that bad. Yeah,
Okay,
but
good.
But it's expensive.
Anyone else?
So we're individually employed, and so we were purchasing our health insurance on the individual marketplace. And the last years, as the price climbed before our policy or our company dropped dropped individuals from their offerings, I think our health insurance had doubled in those last couple of years. It was a significant part of our family living expenditure, and you maybe don't want to hear this, but the exchange programs offered through the new healthcare program actually benefited our family.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
I have the good fortune to have a wife that works at a business that provides us health care. But I do believe and hear from dairy farmers that the burden of health care costs are very incredibly burdensome on them. So I think that's significant in the factor also.
In my understanding for small businesses, it's one of top 2 issues, and we got to find a way to lower costs for those on the market. One last question. I worked hard in this committee to pass a foot and mouth disease vaccine bank. We normally associate that with beef and pork, but is this also important to our dairy industry?
My personal opinion is that it is important. I think any disease, whether it's relevant to dairy or parallels dairy, I think there's importance to the food supply chain and also to the credibility of consumers also.
Well, we want to work hard to sustain funding for the foot and mouth disease vaccine bank, because we know it would cut off our trade, at least in the beef realm, for 5 years, and I would assume it would have the same impact if it went into the dairy industry as well. So, well, with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We thank the gentleman from Nebraska, and our next member is my colleague and good friend again from the Central Coast. We've got a lot of the Central Coast represented on this committee, which is very good. Congressman Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all the witnesses here today for taking time from your schedules to be here. I just wanted to associate myself with Representative Panetta's comments and statements earlier. My father first came to this country as part of the Bracero program, the guest worker program. And after it ended, he immigrated all our family. As a matter of fact, I was 5 years old when I came to this country. And so I'm very familiar with the labor side of agriculture. And I would say, Mr. McMahon, I think you're right about what a guest worker program will look like and the type of workforce perhaps that the dairy industry is experiencing perhaps a guest worker program, many of those workers would want to return to their countries. As part of the broader ag, I think many families are here already working in ag, and many families would not want to return back after so many years of living here. So what I'm hearing from the ag interests in my district is a guest worker program would be the icing on the cake, because first, we need to legalize and provide the existing workforce to be able to continue and be here. And a guest worker program would be an added program that would complete and sustain the type of labor that is needed by agriculture. But I would imagine the dairy industry is slightly different. For Mr. Michalewski, my question is, as I met with farmers in my district, they emphasized the need to expand the Asian markets, in particular Japan. U.S. competitors are gaining new access to the Japanese markets, leaving the U.S. behind. Similar to specialty crop exports in my district, Japan is a significant market that still maintains extraordinary high tariffs and unreasonable sanitary and phytosanitary standards for dairy exports. Gaining positive access would no doubt be a big win for California agriculture industry, including dairies. You mentioned in your testimony that in addition to an accelerated phase-in of tariff reductions, non-tariff barriers must also be addressed in a free trade agreement with Japan. Mr. Michalewski, did I say that right? All right. Can you please describe what these barriers are and what your overall goals are for the U.S. negotiations with Japan?
Sure. Thank you for the question. The Japanese market's an interesting market. It's probably the highest value market of any dairy importing country in the world. They charge basically the highest prices and sell to the consumers at their highest prices. It's done through a tender process when you go in, the ALEC tender process. It's a very, very difficult process to get in. Most countries like Australia and New Zealand have had either preferential treatment or a long history of being involved. When we stepped away from TPP, we lost any of the gains that were made, albeit they were minimal, but there were gains with TRQs to go in. Since then, the EU has put together a joint program with Japan. So we're getting beat out by the New Zealanders, we're getting beat out by the EU at this point. A favorable agreement would have us on a level playing field. Our dairy farmers can compete with anyone in the world. Just give us a level playing field. And I would say to some extent, sometimes there's barriers put up that you may not fully realize. And some of those are how you label product. We can label a product here called butter, and someone else can call it mid-fat cream cheese, and it gets into the market with a much lower tariff, what they call tariff busters. And so we need not only a comprehensive look at the sanitary, phytosanitary standards, tariffs, TRQs, but also an adherence to what I consider proper discipline around products and importing.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from the Central Coast for your focus, and I think both the issue of Japan and the labor issue is things this subcommittee is going to have to continue to work on. Our, I believe, last member who is here for questioning is the gentleman from Kansas, Congressmember Marshall.
Thank you so much, Chairman. The fastest growing dairy herd in the country in Kansas, so very proud of our dairies. Also very proud of the co-ops we have across Kansas. DFA, Land O'Lakes, CHS are several co-ops that have been my producers really brag on them and say they've made a big impact. So my first question for Ms. Frerichs is how is the co-op you're part of, which will be Land O'Lakes, is that right? How has it helped you weather these last 3 or 4 years of the storm?
First, thank you for the question, Congressman. I believe that the decisions our cooperative made several years ago to more carefully manage our milk supply and our customers' contracts, we commonly refer to it as our base program, has helped our co-op pay some of the highest prices, at least in the state of Minnesota, by the numbers I've seen. And so if each co-op in the country perhaps would more carefully manage their incoming supply and their customer contracts, we could see price improvement all around. But I think that's the number one thing that our co-op has done for us, is provided a higher pay price. But they've also, I think co-ops look at members as family members beyond just the economics, but supporting every other part of our lives, from our healthcare to our mental health to farm business management skills and risk management opportunities to nutrition for our cattle and so on. There are a number of programs that our co-op, and I know other co-ops, offer to members to improve both business and life.
Great. Andre, maybe to you the same question. What have you been doing to help the farmers, the producers, weather this storm, and what do you think you see your co-op doing in the future to help us through this next year or so?
There's a number of things we do. I think to build on the comments that were just made about Land O'Lakes, we have what we call a capacity allocation program. I think you mentioned Dairy Farmers of America. They have a base program. Most of the large co-ops have a way to manage the supply of product coming into the processing capacity, the ability to sell milk. It's not quite a supply management program, but it does put some constraints. The second thing we do is we do a lot of advocacy for our farmers, both on a state level where we have water regulations, air regulations, and at the federal level, similar to me being here today, advocating for trade. We think that's helpful to our farmers. We also have a member benefits program. Healthcare was mentioned earlier. We've put together a custom program for the dairy farmers in the state of California with Western growers to put together a healthcare program to try and make
An association healthcare plan?
It's a combined group where we've designed a special program for our dairy farmers. Most of the large co-ops, you mentioned Dairy Farmers of America as well as Land O'Lakes and ours, have a member benefit. So when you join the larger co-ops, you'll have access to discount pricing for supplies, for feed, for on-farm, necessities and that. So that's kind of just a broad spectrum of some of the things.
Let's go back to USMCA real quickly. I want to know specifically how USMCA would impact your producers. And we'll start with Andre. Why is it important to California dairies? Why is USMCA specifically important for you all?
Well, first of all, 60% of all the milk powder we make goes outside the country, and Mexico is our largest market. So if I don't have my largest market for my milk powder, I'll have a whole lot of warehouses full of milk powder and low prices.
There you go. Mike, you're from New York, is that right? Why is USMCA important to New York dairy?
USMCA is vitally important. The next county to the west of ours, 28 large producers got together and built a $100 million powder plant out of their own money. And they had this great market called Canada until they came up with their Class 7 milk. And so, yeah, that being addressed is certainly going to help them out. I mean, USMCA has to be passed.
And Dr. Brown, Missouri dairy, why is it important to Missouri dairy?
Again, I think gives us an opportunity for product to move outside the United States, and in a period where U.S. milk supplies are growing, it's important to make sure we have those opportunities.
And Mr. Smith, Pennsylvania dairy farmers, why is USMCA important?
Absolutely important. We've gotten into the discussion about regional milk markets and things like that, but milk flows across the country, and what is good for the dairymen in California with trade is good for the dairymen in Pennsylvania with trade also.
All right. Ms. Frerichs, you get to clean it up. Why is it important to your personal dairy?
I'll echo Mr. Smith's comments that what is good for one state in the nation is good for all of us. We no longer have regional dairy supplies or even a national dairy supply. We're talking about a global dairy supply. And so unfettered trade is what this business needs to succeed.
Okay, thank you so much. I yield back, Chairman.
All right. Before we close, I want to thank all of the witnesses. You've done an excellent job this morning in terms of your testimony. More importantly, I think the questions that you answered showed a level of consensus in terms of the needs of America's dairy industry, and the fact that there was a large amount of consensus among the five of you that kind of regionally represent the breadth and width of America's dairy industry is important. And so I want you to know that We look forward to continuing to work with you. Before we adjourn, I want to defer to the gentleman from Pennsylvania who is standing in lieu of the ranking member. Congressman Thompson, do you have any final comments you'd like to make?
Well, Chairman, first of all, thank you for this hearing and your leadership, and thank you for all the witnesses for being here. I mean, we talked a lot about the dairy industry, individual dairy farm families, which is extremely important, but it's also about the success of rural America. We've seen what the difficulties over the past 8-9 years with the dairy industry, how that has negatively impacted the rural economy. And so, Chairman, I know we're all looking forward to working with you and your leadership so that we can do everything we can to make sure that at the end of the day, our dairy farm families wind up with more money in their pockets. And quite frankly, it'll help us have a robust rural economy. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the kind words, and I do look forward to continuing to work on a bipartisan basis. I think the overwhelming majority of issues that we'll be dealing with on this subcommittee, and really the full committee, as Chairman Peterson and Conway have indicated, are bipartisan, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be working together on behalf of the American people and American agriculture. And today's hearing, I think, really focused on the needs of America's dairy industry as it relates to implementing the new dairy title that we passed last year that we think is a much better approach to dealing with the cyclical nature of the pricing that we deal with. But the points that were made here as it relates to trade, the all-important efforts on trade, as well as labor, I think are efforts and issues that this subcommittee will continue to work with. And let me just say, this is just the first of what I believe will be at least 1 to 2 subcommittee hearings a month, and we hope to try to have an opportunity to take the subcommittee out to various parts of the country and also work with members who want to hold local regional workshops in which the livestock industry can participate in, not only dairy, but poultry, beef, cattle, and pork, as well as focusing on these trade issues, because that is part of the overview and responsibility of the subcommittee. With that said, again, thank the 5 witnesses. You were all stars. You did a terrific job. And under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material, supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. And this is the hearing of Committee on Livestock and Foreign Agriculture at this time is now adjourned. Thank you.